everyone. Welcome back to the No Cap Space. Let me share a story with y'all. I got back from Tampa from the Final Four. Thank y'all again for all your support on the coverage. Late last night, and today was gonna be my day to sleep in. Get a little sleep back. It was a long weekend, very fun weekend, but a long weekend. A lot of work put in, a lot of fun had. And normally I wake up around 8 a.m., right? But never really earlier than 8 a.m. And around like 7:15, I wake up. I never do that. Never do that. And I look at my phone just to check the time. And I see producer Shardy in the OCast Space chat send this in. And I said, you know what? Fine. I won't sleep in. Let's talk about Olivia Miles officially going to TCU according to Talia Goodman of On3 Sports. I want to break this up into three parts. We're going to break this up into Olivia, into TCU, into the Big 12, because there's an interesting trend that has now started within the Big 12 that I'm very intrigued by. But first off, obviously, we now have the answer to one of the most shocking questions in the transfer portal era, right? Where was Olivia Miles going to transfer from Notre Dame to? And TCU was certainly a school that I think a lot of people thought of very quickly. And realistically, for Olivia Miles, and I have no insight onto why she wanted to leave Notre Dame directly, right? But here's what we know about TCU, just generally speaking. One, we've just seen what they did with Haley Van Lith and how pro-ready Haley Van Lith looked in that system, right? And keep in mind, this is a system that Sabrina Ionescu participated in at Oregon. Mark Campbell was one of the lead assistants. Now brings that there and does what he does with Haley Van Lith. The pick and roll game was like incredibly kind of pro style, quote unquote. And so if you're wanting, as Olivia Miles, to go to a program that can, not that she wasn't pro ready, because I mean obviously we know where she was projected to be at in the draft. At worst, a lottery pick. I can't imagine any world where she drops out of that. So it's not even necessarily about being pro ready, but it's about going to a program that can maybe maintain your readiness, right? And while also doing that, we know TCU has some NIL motion, right? And again, I don't know if that is anything to do with the reasoning or anything. I mean, look, I woke up to this, so I'm right here with you, But I think it's a very, very good mix of being able to potentially show off new skills on the court, of being able to be in a system that can keep you pro ready, and also go and make the NIL aspect. So I think from a general perspective, I think that there might end up being people that feel potentially underwhelmed by this, just because you're going from Notre Dame and being like the face of Notre Dame to a TCU program that obviously, like, this was their best year ever of all time, and that was making the Elite Eight. But for me, I think that this makes sense. If you're going to leave Notre Dame, this is a place that makes sense. If you go back to my initial reaction video, TCU was one of the very first schools that I thought of, and I know a lot of other people thought of as well. I wasn't alone in that. So to me, even though ultimately the fact that Olivia Miles is not going to be in a Notre Dame jersey is still so incredibly shocking to me, and still doesn't even feel like real to say. But when it comes to making a move, if you're going to make it, this is one that to me makes sense. I'm fairly confident that Notre Dame is not done in the portal, but you do have some good pieces around you. You're going to still have a Donovan Hunter. You're still going to have a Maddie Sherrick coming back. You're going to have of Madison Connor. So there's players here surrounding her on the perimeter to do damage in the Big 12, right? And to try and keep this up for TCU as a program. But I'm certainly looking at any size that they can add. Obviously, if you're losing Sedona, you don't really have like kind of that immediate player to go back in with that. And so I'm looking at who they can add, and not necessarily that you have to match Sedona's size because it's easier said than done to do that. But I will be interested in seeing what big they can get because the pick and roll part of TCU's system is massive and what makes it so appealing to guards. So Olivia Miles is going to be in Dallas, not far from me. Sounds like we got to put boots on the ground. However, Karma, let's talk about TCU, the program, because they have officially put themselves into a very, very interesting category, right? We'll have to see it on the court, obviously. But they have officially put themselves in a position to prove that last year was not a quote-unquote fluke. Now, not that I say fluke in the way of you go and get the biggest name in the portal again. I mean, it's Olivia Miles and it's obviously Tania Latson are the two names in the portal. And so to be able to go and get one of those two, which you can kind of rank in any order, is such an accomplishment for this program that, again, just had their best season of all time. There is no history of success at TCU. Whatever success you're having is more than likely the history. And so what Mark Campbell has been able to do in leveraging, whether it be NIL or the conference or whatever it may be that he is saying in these recruiting meetings, he has absolutely found his niche in all of this. And from a program perspective, from a long-term perspective, to me, this feels like the for now. Because you got to understand where TCU is at. They're in Texas. They're in Fort Worth, Dallas area. Like, there's some players coming out of that area. And at some point, it feels, with the recruitment, and I think portal recruitment and college recruitment are very different, but at some point, they're going to get that a good recruit or two or three. That's what this feels like. And so to be able to go and you had to maintain it, though. I think that was the important part. And again, this is purely just talking about the portal success right now because we'll judge the on-court success when it gets here. But from a portal success standard, you have now gone and got arguably the biggest name, best name in the portal 2 years in a row at a program that has no history. There is no historic pool. There was no star players that are going to join. Just think off the top of my head, like USC would probably be the other program that I thought won the portal last year, right? With Kiki, with Talia. They obviously have your Juju Watkins and you have the USC brand, right? They're kind of the sleeping giant of that. TCU has none of that. So I'm just, generally speaking, incredibly impressed with what TCU has been able to build and kind of carve out a place for themselves in the ecosystem of NCAA women's basketball. And again, to me, if I'm TCU, this is not where I want to be at forever, right? I don't want to be the 1 year stop, and then having to do this every single year and just kind of banking on the fact that you're able to get these players. I don't want to rely on that long term. But when it comes to setting up your program and building a floor, building a foundation of what the program can be, that is a perfect use of the transfer portal. And so just a massive win for TCU, right? And again, I want to see them go and get another big in the portal. But I mean, you have to be incredibly encouraged, right? Incredibly encouraged if you're TCU. But that brings me to my last point about the Big 12. And this is something that I had been eyeing when Jay Williams transferred from Arizona to Iowa State. But I feel like in the Power 4 era, now, without the Pac-12, right? With without them, right? I feel like there's been a pretty clear hierarchy amongst the Power Four conferences. And I also feel like pretty clearly the Big 12 moved to the bottom of that with Oklahoma and Texas leaving. For example, Iowa State didn't have their best year. Kansas State had a good year. TCU obviously had, I mean, again, a great year. But like when it came to the national conversation, the SEC is the SEC. The Big Ten add the teams that they add, the LA schools, Oregon, Washington, on top of the already good schools that they had. The ACC, I mean, is going to always kind of just be around, whether it be just through Notre Dame or, I mean, you have your Louisvilles, you have your star guard talent in there, your Duke, UNC. Like, I mean, there's like the ACC is around. And it felt like all those had, to some level, identities. The Big 12, by adding the Pac-12 schools and already kind of what they had, their identity is almost not having an identity because there's a lot of different styles within the Big 12. If I told you, if I had, if I asked you what is the Big 12 style of play, I don't know if there is one, right? And that is kind of similar to where the Pac-12 was. But what the Big 12 is increasingly doing is becoming the place for some of these bigger name transfers that maybe feel like they haven't been able to find success in the other three, right? I mentioned Jada Williams. Obviously, that's an in-conference transfer. It still feels weird for that to be in conference, but to stay in conference, I think is major. Going from Arizona to Iowa State, and I love that fit. I know we haven't talked about it on here at the Final Four and everything, but put this in notes here that I love that fit. I'm very excited to see what that looks like. Talia Scott going to Baylor, having been at two SEC schools, it didn't work out the way that she wanted. Now you go to the Big 12. Now you have Olivia Miles. Again, all differing reasons it feels like, but ultimately you're all coming to the Big 12. And I don't know I don't know if there's NIL involved with that. Like if NIL bags are in the Big 12 are different than like I don't imagine that being the case. Like where other power conferences aren't competing with the Big 12. I certainly don't imagine that. But it's an interesting trend of the Big 12 potentially finding an identity, and that identity being through the transfer portal, and how it might really genuinely shake up the Big 12 year in and year out, depending on how schools succeed in the transfer portal. Obviously, nobody has been doing that better than TCU, but it's an interesting thing that I'm eyeing. I'm not ready to call it that yet, but I genuinely think in a couple of years, we could be looking at the Haley Van Lith transfer as an incredible tone setter for what the Big 12 can be for players, where it might not be the like most eyes on you. It might not like you might not be the highest expectations at different times, but I think it's an interesting place right now because in the national landscape, I feel like you have your top three conferences, the SEC, ACC, and Big Ten. You have the Big 12, and then you have your mid-majors, just from a national dialogue perspective. And it puts the Big 12 in a very interesting place to operate in the portal. But obviously, we've seen Kansas State make the Sweet 16. We saw TCU make the Elite Eight. There is success to still be had in this conference. I think Iowa State's going to be better this year. I think Baylor is going to be better this year. It's something that I'm eyeing, and I wanted to put it down now to see and to note it here to see how this develops. And we'll see how the rest of the portal goes and everything like that as well. But most importantly, Olivia Miles is headed to TCU. It's going to be so weird seeing her in a different college uniform, but I'm incredibly excited to see what growth we see here, what we learn about Olivia Miles' game at TCU, what we learn about TCU, the program, because I mean this is a style of program that I feel like we haven't really. I mean, I feel like Ole Miss maybe is kind of the other like transfer program, but they haven't been able to get the names in the way that TCU has, especially not this early. And kind of like this like quick of a turnaround. It's been a build for Ole Miss. So I'm very interested in seeing like what we continue to learn about TCU, what they continue to do in this offseason. But again, most importantly, Olivia Miles, we have our answer to, again, one of the most surprising questions that we've ever had to ask. Where was Olivia Miles transferring to? We now know she'll be at TCU. So make sure you guys stay tapped in here across the board with no cap space. Again, thank you guys so much for your support of our Final Four coverage. Make sure you tapped in everywhere because the WNBA draft is coming up. I mean, it's less than a week now? Less than a week away. So I'm going to sleep from now until then. But make sure you're tapped in so you know whenever I wake up or whenever somebody else posts something, you're notified of it. So thank y'all, and I'll see you next time.